This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
This week's episode of Two Bad Hombres is brought to you by DC Sports at Lakeside Mall in Sterling Heights. DC Sports is your premier destination and go-to source for authentic sports memorabilia and terrific autograph signings in Detroit and beyond. To find out more about its upcoming signing with Lou Whitaker tomorrow afternoon at its fine location once again at Lakeside Mall in Sterling Heights, please follow DC Sports on Twitter at DC Sports Detroit. And also make sure to check out DC Sports' terrific website at DetroitCitySports.com.
I was trying to get it how I live. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get it, get fly. I got 6 jobs, I don't get tired. I don't get
And we are still not tired on this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. I am your host, Vito Geronimo Churko, and I am not alongside my usual sidekick and broadcast partner in fun, that is Doc, from Doc and Jock, John Charles Macaroon. Instead, I'm joined by Johnson Square, the Johnson brothers, Brendan and Aaron. Aaron right here, Brendan right there. You guys can't see them, doesn't matter what I'm saying right now, but I see the two of them, and they're with me at my alma mater of Warren De La Salle Collegiate this morning to record a fresh edition of Two Bad Hombres. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Vito. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And Brendan, how are you doing as well?
Fantastic. It's exciting to be here. We get to do this at our alma mater, and we get to talk some good sports. Loving it.
Should be fun. Good to see you guys, and both you guys from PalaceofPistons.com. Aaron, the younger brother, but I got to give him credit. He did found PalaceofPistons.com. Now, when did you do so, and just what was the process leading up to that as well for you, Aaron?
Well, I started it, and I'm going to say 2016. I can't even remember it now just because there's so many things that have happened since then. But I'm going to say 2016, and going into it, it was something that I kind of contemplated doing for a while. I had written at another Pistons blog, and I just wanted to kind of do my own thing, kind of be my own boss. And I had a vision for what I wanted Palace of Pistons to become, and so I took that leap, and it's been a great ride. We've done a lot of cool things, and we hope to continue to do a lot of cool things.
And you started it. You said in 2016, you think. That means when you were back in high school.
Yeah.
In these hallways at De La Salle.
Oh, yeah.
That's something else, man. That's impressive, too.
I spent a lot of time in these classrooms on my computer typing away at articles and doing social media posts when I should have been doing schoolwork, but it's all been worth it.
Should have been listening to your teachers, but instead you were writing stuff for PalaceofPistons.com. And good for you. It's worked out. Brendan, what do you have to say in response to that, by the way?
I got to say that he has a darn good big brother that set a great reputation. He's got 2 good big brothers that set a good reputation for him, so there was no suspecting that he was in the back of the classroom doing that kind of tomfoolery. When you have 2 nice, good big brothers that get good grades or nice to the teachers, Aaron's the quieter one, just sat in the back and just typed away, but they suspected nothing.
Got away with it because of that.
Absolutely, so you're welcome.
I actually have a funny story about that. So I was in math class, and the Pistons traded for Tobias Harris. And that's a pretty big story for the Pistons, especially at that time. So I was sitting in math class, and in math, you weren't allowed to bring your computer to class, but I had my phone. And it was right around the end of the day because it was my last period of the day. So it was probably about 2:30, 2:45, around there. So I was like, I got to start writing this. I got to get this out. This is a huge news hit. So I was literally sitting on my phone, and I had it like on the side of me down towards the floor, and I was trying to type. So I went to the most extreme lengths to do it, but it's all been worth it. I've loved every second of it. There's never been a time where I've doubted what I'm doing. It's been such a great journey, and I'm excited to keep continuing it.
So you got it done no matter what. Even while at De La
yeah.
Salle, he made sure he got those articles in. Very impressive. Now, your third co-host for Palace of Pistons, the podcast, is Ryan Paye. De La Salle alum himself, just like myself, all of us here. So I went to school when he was going. Older than me, though. He's the oldest, I think, of all of us here. He is, right? But I was on the basketball team helping out with it when he was playing for Greg Essler. Then I met Zach as well, his younger brother. You guys know him. That's your cousin as well. And he's younger. Aaron's the youngest, though.
Yes.
Then Zach, then Brendan, then Ryan, obviously. Is that true? Brennan, you can back it up.
Zach's
Verify
older
here.
than me, right? So Ryan's class of 2010.
He's the oldest dude
Zach's
here.
2013. I'm 2015. Aaron is 2018. You're 2011.
2011.
Okay.
So I'm the
There we
oldest
go.
here today. But anyways, let's get this started now.
Well, I'm seeing some gray.
Do you see anything? I hope not. I'm trying to dye my hair and color it in. But anyways, the Pistons now. You know what? Do we say they have some grays on there, in terms of age and veteran savvy? I don't know about that. I'm just trying to play off what you said. But 41-41 last season, okay? First round exit via a sweep against the Bucks, who were the best team in the regular season. So that was expected. But what do we draw from that experience for the Pistons? And what were the positives and negatives from the season as a whole as well? And starting with you, Aaron, on this one.
Well, I think you kind of saw the blueprint of what the Pistons wanted to do. The expectation was for them to get swept in that first round matchup against the Bucks. I think a lot of people thought the Bucks could go on to even win the championship, but a lot expected them to get to the championship. But with the Pistons, we saw that Blake Griffin is absolutely, no doubt, their best player. Andre Drummond is a fantastic player, and he had maybe a rough first half of the season, but had a very good second half of the season. Of course, he didn't play too well in the playoffs, but that second half of the season for him kind of showed what Detroit wants from Drummond, where maybe he doesn't have the touches that he had under Stan Van Gundy in his final season with the Pistons, where he was helping initiate the offense from the top of the key, running a lot of dribble handoffs. A lot of what Drummond did in the second half of this past season was just attacking the rim for second chance points, getting quick buckets, running more pick and roll with Reggie Jackson, and we saw that turn into success for Detroit. Positives got to be that Blake Griffin was able to stay healthy for the majority of the season, had his best season or maybe second best season of his career, and you got to see Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond bounce back in the second half of the season, and Luke Kennard is starting to look like a real player. Negatives are maybe this team doesn't have too high of a ceiling, and if you're a championship or bust kind of guy, you don't like that, but it is what it is with this team. Unless there's a huge move, unless there's a big trade or Sekou Doumbouya ends up turning into this next international star, then it's perhaps a different game for the Pistons.
Well, KD did decline his player options, so maybe
So he's coming to Motown, right? Coming to Little Caesars Arena. He wants to play for Tom Gores and company, obviously. But Kennard, he was the best Piston in the playoff series against the Bucks. I mean, clear cut to me. He was scoring the basketball, and it seemed like nobody else could score it. And probably because Blake Griffin was hobbled by injury, wasn't the same Blake Griffin in the postseason. Now, my concern with him and the Pistons moving forward is that he played in 75 games, career year, one of his best seasons at least, and was an all-star. But they only went 41-41. So, my concern, I think a lot of Pistons fans, too, on the outside looking in, Brendan, look at him and think, he's not going to play 75 games again or replicate that kind of season. So what does that mean? Less than 41 wins, obviously. What do you say in response to that? Because there are people, you guys see it. You see it on Twitter probably all the time. I know you guys are on Twitter. What do you have to say in response to that, Brendan?
Well, what I think Detroit has to do, first of all, is they have to find a way. I don't know if Blake can play 75 games again next year. I don't even know if he's healthy that you should play him 75 games next year. Detroit was in a position last season that, hey, we have to make the playoffs. We have to get in, and we're going to do whatever we have to do. And there's games that I very vividly remember, like when Blake was hobbled late in the year and we played OKC. And it was a game that, Detroit could afford to maybe let him rest. They had a home stretch coming up. They had an extra day off for the mix. Give them a few extra days. We need them for these home games that should be maybe easier wins, etc. But we got aggressive and said, hey, we have to win these games. And even a couple times rolled the dice on playing Blake and, didn't get the job done. Lost the game. But Detroit's got to find a few answers. What direction are they going to go with that backup point guard? And then how does that translate into any competition with Reggie Jackson? Because Reggie's been inconsistent. In the playoffs, Reggie Jackson looked like he could be a very good starting point guard at times. But, throughout the season, he's up and down and up and down. We talk about Andre Drummond. Andre had a great second half of the season. First half started slow, but I think finally some maturity and Blake Griffin really getting into him and helping him, grow as a player and as a leader made a big difference. You're going to get now a full offseason of improving upon that and then a full season, hopefully, of that, right? So if Blake doesn't play 75 games, I don't think that necessarily means, they're below 41-41. Because, yes, the Pistons had a few games, as everybody does, where it's like, man, how do they win that game? Whether it was a comeback, whether it was maybe just should have been in the game, we're playing shorthanded, and the other team just took a night off. But the flip side is Detroit seemed like there were several nights that you're one or two, a couple bounces away from all of a sudden winning that game, taking a game here, and looking like a 45-47 win team instead of a 41-win team.
The other thing I'll say about that is the Pistons have already improved their roster before free agency has even started going into next season. And you see the way that Jackson and Drummond played in the second half of the season. You have to hope that that carries over to next season. I know the talk about Reggie Jackson right now is that he's going to have his first healthy offseason for the first time in 2-3 seasons. So that's going to be huge for him. Drummond has to continue to mature and develop as a player. And the talk around him is that he's been in the gym now more than ever in the offseason, which is at least good to hear if you're a Piston fan, because you want to see him continue to grow as a player and get better. Even if you don't necessarily like him in a Detroit uniform, if you like the Pistons, he's going to need to be better because he's one of your top players. And then the roster, you add Tony Snell, you add Sekou Doumbouya. Those are two guys that are 6'7", and then 6'9" is Doumbouya. Detroit didn't have that at small forward last year, and both those guys are going to greatly improve their small forward spot. Snell is a guy that hit 40% from the three-point line last season. He's going to potentially be your starter, and a guy that you look at the role that Bruce Brown and Stanley Johnson had in the starting lineup. A lot of their shots were just catch-and-shoot threes in the corner, on the wing, and those aren't good three-point shooters, so they weren't making those shots. But with Snell, a 40% three-point shooter, you can imagine a lot more of those shots going in, and those points add up each game. And, well, you have to like that. That's something that's going to greatly help Detroit. And like Brendan said, in free agency, how do they attack the backup point guard spot? Where do they go for a backup center? Because you can't run it back with Zaza Pachulia after the season that he had. So there are some questions, but as of now, this team has already gotten better, and you have to hope that with Kennard growing and Bruce Brown growing and these guys that you bring in, maybe you don't have to play Blake 75 games. Maybe you can play Blake 70 games, and you can give him another 5 games off and spread those out throughout the year and give him some extra time to rest and rehab and just take some time off, and let's see the rest of these guys go and get a couple wins and keep the Pistons playoff hopes alive.
But how are the Pistons going to replace the production of John Lure? I mean, that's the biggest question here. My God, it was so great for the Pistons. Everybody loved him. But they got Tony Snell, realistically, now in that trade with the Bucks. And the number 30 overall pick, which the Pistons then traded on draft night for 4 future second-rounders. So, I mean, that's looking like a draft steal, potentially. But it's all about who they take eventually. Like, we can be excited. Everybody is, right? Because it looks like they're finally being serious about what I would label as a semi-rebuild. It's not a full-on rebuild. They're still trying to win a little bit. And you guys know more. You follow the team day in, day out. How would you describe what the Pistons are aiming for right now and the direction they're going in? Is it still just a retooling, or is it more of a rebuild than we've seen in recent memory out of the Pistons too?
I wouldn't call it a rebuild because the Pistons are dead set on winning, but at the same time, they've injected more youth into their roster than we've seen in a very long time. Just at the shooting guard spot alone, there's 3-4 young players there. With their draft, they drafted 2 small forwards. They drafted a point guard. So they've injected a lot of youth to the roster that they believe can help them win now as they mature and as they develop. So wouldn't call it a full-scale rebuild, but I think that they're kind of preparing for the future at the same time without having to tear down the roster.
It's one of those things where I think Ed Stefanski and I have been on the same page for a while.
Because you guys both are brilliant individuals, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
He might get on the phone every night and talk Pistons. They're group thinking with each other.
He might make a couple dollars more than I do, but
Only
beyond the point. The Pistons are in a spot where the owner wants to win. He wants to be competitive. He wants to make the playoffs. He doesn't want to be in a position where they're tanking, where they're intentionally losing games, because attendance is already poor. And you've got to find a way to still get people in the seats, and you still got to find a way to make some money. So his philosophy is we need to compete. We need to do whatever we can to be competitive. Competitive enough to get some home games, to get some revenue, and not be in the negative, right? On the flip side, Ed Stefanski, I think, acknowledges, okay, well, we need to try to be as competitive as possible, but we need to protect ourselves and position ourselves for, the post-Blake era, potentially the post-Andre era. The Pistons will have some interesting decisions to make, both as an organization, and the players will have to make some interesting decisions, because after next year, Reggie's off the books. Andre has a player option, and you're looking at one more year, I think, on the Blake deal, right? Or then 2 more years?
1 or 2, I'm not sure which.
But the point is, the window then is short, and Dre could decide to opt in for 1 more year. But if let's say he has a decent year next year, maybe he decides to opt out so he secures another long-term deal. Does Detroit sign him to another long-term deal? Does he go elsewhere? Reggie Jackson, what kind of year is he going to have, right? You may be replacing your point guard. So Ed Stefanski and crew have done a really good job of getting some young pieces. I think Luke Kennard's your shooting guard of the future. I think Sekou Doumbouya is your small forward of the future. And then you can try to just fill the pieces around. Hopefully Detroit doesn't start try to find a centerpiece as a center to build around for the future. Hopefully it's another guard. But I think Doumbouya has a very high ceiling if he's developed and given the proper time, which is probably 3 years before you really see a major step taken as they could potentially be a top-level wing in the NBA. But they're positioning themselves for not just being in a total dumpster fire like they were the last time they started moving their pieces and drifting away from competing.
I think Ed Stefanski honestly does know what he's doing, okay? But owner Tom Gores, really don't think so. Does that matter, though? The team owner not really knowing what he's doing and thinking, because I truly think he thinks that he has a big 3 in Blake Griffin, Drummond, and Reggie Jackson. That's a putrid and invalid, just blasphemous, Stephen A. Smith-esque, if he were to be here right now, to describe that big 3. Because I don't think it's a real big 3. It's a flawed, very flawed, invalid big 3.
It's not. It's not a big 3. And if you're Tom Gores, though, and you're in this business venture, if you will, and you still need to be making some money off of it, over time I've really started to wonder, is this all just kind of a bluff on his part?
Smoke and mirrors, almost?
I don't, to him, tanking is not an option.
Yes.
Which is fine. Some people have different views on that. That's okay. Tanking's not an option. I don't know how seriously he necessarily believes in that being a big 3. I think that, he went after a guy like Blake Griffin, and he said we have a superstar now. He acknowledges that Dre and Reggie are not that level. By making that statement alone, he acknowledges they are not a superstar level. I think that maybe he sees a greater output potential out of this Pistons roster than maybe realistic. But if anything, I look at the trade deadline this year as a top indicator. Detroit could have went after a guy like Mike Conley, and they could have given up the world to get Mike Conley and upgrade their point guard position. With that, you'd be committing to another long-term deal, a lot of money to a guy that's over 30. And Tom Gores, maybe it was with the influence of Ed Stefanski, maybe it was on his own merit. Obviously, we don't know. But Detroit didn't make that trade. And if Tom Gores would have said, make the move, well, when your boss says do it, you kind of just say, okay, I guess we'll do it. But he trusted Ed Stefanski, he trusted his guys that it wasn't the right move to make, which really excited me. So if Tom has this mindset of, well, we can win now with the guys we have, well, I mean, they can win something.
The thing is, what do they win? Yeah, what is their ceiling with this supposed false, fake big 3 of Reggie Jackson, Andre Drummond, and Blake Griffin, Aaron?
See, I think the thing with Tom Gores is, in years past, he's been the authoritative figure. He's reportedly blocked a couple Andre Drummond trades during Stan Van Gundy's tenure with the team. But with Ed Stefanski in the fold now, it's almost like Gores has kind of said, okay, I'm going to give you your chance to do it your way, and I'm going to give you a period of time to do it. But when that doesn't work out, I'm going to step back in, and I'm going to make the big decisions then. And so far, so good for the Pistons. The signings they've made, the draft picks they made, both Bruce Brown and Kyrie Thomas look like they can be something in the NBA. They've given Ed Stefanski the power to kind of be the general manager, be the senior advisor. That's his title. And Gores has kind of sat back and said, I'm listening to you, which is good to see because in years past, it didn't always appear that was the mindset, that was the way of thinking with Gores. I think they're very open to improving the roster. I think they're very open to moving on from Reggie Jackson. I think we've seen reports that Dwayne Casey's not a huge fan of Jackson. I know that in the first half of the season, Casey had Jackson playing a completely different style of basketball than he was used to playing. Not a ton of pick and roll. Jackson was spending time as a shooting guard, spending a ton of time off the basketball. That's not how Jackson has played throughout his entire career. Obviously, he bounced back in the second half of the season when the Pistons gave him the ball more, ran more pick and roll. But Detroit's going to be very open to improving this roster, and it doesn't just stop with Jackson as a member of that big three. I think it extends all the way to Drummond because in today's NBA, we've seen centers become less and less valuable, and we saw Drummond in the playoffs this past April kind of struggle. So I think the team has kind of noticed that, and Ed Stefanski at least has been very not adamant, but he's been very clear in saying that Andre's not a star yet. He's got a lot of potential, but he hasn't reached it. So I think this team would be willing to move Drummond too. So maybe this isn't a big three in a sense of these are three really good players. These are three all-star level players because Jackson isn't that and Drummond is a fringe level all-star right now. But you have to kind of see what Ed Stefanski has done and trust that Tom Gores has given him that leash and he's letting Ed Stefanski do that. And this is a different Tom Gores than we're seeing in years past. And if this is the version of Tom Gores that is going to stay, then I think the tune on him among Pistons fans has got to change because in the past, Gores got a lot of rightful criticism. But now that he's sitting back, that's what you would want from your owner to do. Let your basketball minds make the basketball decisions.
Guys, I feel like Ish Smith was better than Reggie Jackson at times. So that's a big concern for me now moving forward, for the Pistons as a franchise. Without him as the backup, who was very good down the stretch of games in crunch time. He was scoring buckets. I remember a game down the stretch where Tom Gores was actually there. Not many games that I remember him being at Little Caesars Arena to watch the Pistons. But he was for a game. Reggie was there, obviously, available to play, and so was Ish. And he was all over Reggie and wanted Reggie to take over. I think he told him, Reggie, take over. Guess who was doing it, though? It wasn't Reggie Jackson. It was Ish Smith. So at times throughout the season, and we saw Ish in his tenure with the Pistons where he was a better performer, especially, in my opinion, in crunch time, more than Reggie. And maybe because of being able to stay on the court, we saw more out of Ish Smith as well at times when he was in a Pistons uniform. So I think that's a big loss and a big void, that backup point guard spot for the Pistons to fill this offseason. And maybe it's Ish Smith they bring back because I think he brought a lot of value to that Pistons team.
Yeah, well, the thing with Ish is that we can't forget at one point he was a starting point guard in the league, right? So he's spent some time as a starter. He was a high-level backup point guard, no doubt about it. With Ish, you were going to get that spark plug. You get the guy that comes in and just immediately brings some energy that could change the tempo a little bit, which was good for Detroit. There's pros and cons, though, to Ish. Ish is either on or he's still at that high energy and he's turning the ball over. He's being inefficient. We're getting bad shots. So as Ish did have a lot of moments, though, down the stretch where he came in, he made a big, significant difference, even closed out a few games in place of Reggie Jackson because that's who was hot and Dwayne Casey was rolling with them. I think Ish is replaceable. I do think it's a loss. I don't disagree with you, and I like Ish. But I think that if you would have asked me this question at the end of the regular season, it would have been like, we have to have Ish back. And then kind of watching him in the playoffs and being a little, at times, out of control, turnover heavy, it was almost like, maybe we could find somebody else.
Was that a matter of the Bucks' length, though, on the perimeter, which is supreme? And not every team features that now. Other teams are trying to replicate that, the Pistons themselves on the perimeter. But was that a result maybe of that as well, going up against Ish, which, would be a matchup concern and problem? And it was, I think, for Ish as well.
Yeah, absolutely no doubt that the Bucks' length, maybe the longest team in the league when it comes to wingspan, that really did a number against Ish Smith. And Smith is a good player, and I definitely wouldn't rule out a return to Detroit, considering the 3 seasons he had here, where he played a very valuable role and played pretty well. But the length was very worrisome, and that's also due to the Pistons not having a ton of scoring options off the bench, especially when Luke Kennard was put into the starting lineup in the postseason. But, getting Smith back, looking at a guy that's improved as a three-point shooter during his time with the Pistons, shot 35% almost in the 2017-2018 season, 33% last year. So he's jumped from being an albatross of a three-point shooter to now being a not great, but if he takes a three, there's at least a chance it goes in kind of guy. His change of pace is what made him so valuable to the Pistons. And Reggie Jackson was, we're running half-court offense, we're getting to our sets. Ish Smith is, we're going down the court, back and forth, and we'll stop when there's a dead ball, we'll stop when there's a timeout. He was going to get to the basket. He was going to take it himself coast to coast. And that was valuable to the Pistons because it gave them the opportunity to run, and that's when you saw Luke Kennard start hitting shots. You saw some different guys get looks in the offense that were transition looks, and the Pistons played pretty well in transition. They hit shots in transition, and that's where Smith was at his best, in transition. So I think there's a role for Smith back with the Pistons. What would concern me is he's going to be in his 30s now. Does he start to slow down? Does that athleticism that he have start to deteriorate now that he's going to be declining from his prime, if you want to put it that way? That kind of concerns me. There's some different guys on the open market that the Pistons could look at. I know a big name that probably is out of Detroit's realm is Patrick Beverley, considering his mentality, his play style, how he fits. A guy that would fit really well with Blake Griffin and had played with Blake Griffin in Los Angeles. That's a big name in a lot of Pistons Twitter and the Pistons circuit of fans, that Patrick Beverley would be the guy to get. He might be out of the Pistons realm when it comes to price and when it comes to role, considering Beverley would play behind Reggie Jackson. But if the Pistons end up back with Smith as the backup point guard, they're in a pretty good spot because what he did in 3 seasons, we know he can step in and start. He's improved as a three-point shooter, and he plays a different style of basketball than Reggie Jackson, which was valuable to Detroit at times. What I will say is he did kind of look bad in the playoffs, but to your point, Vito, there were times when he just won the Pistons games. And when your backup point guard has that ability, that kind of says something. That means he's a pretty talented player. And there were multiple times where he took over quarters, when he took over late in the game, and that's pretty valuable. So the Pistons should definitely be talking to him in free agency.
It seems like there were times where it was Blake taking over, which he did a lot in his All-Star campaign this past season, or it was Ish Smith taking over, like you said, down the stretch off the bench or starting in the place of Reggie in past seasons. Not this season as much because Reggie was much more healthy for the entirety of the season. But anyways, to Blake now, I want to bring him up as I don't really believe he's happy in Motown. I think he's pretending and he sells it and he makes it look good because he knows what it takes, the PR side of things, to make it look good as the veteran leader of the squad. But there are no Kardashians coming here, no Jenners walking through those doors or the tunnel at Little Caesars Arena. And I think he's missing out on all of that and the bright lights of L.A., where he was a stand-up comic as well. I mean, he was building his brand out there. You can't build your voice nearly as much. And I love Detroit. I'm not bashing Detroit. I know it sounds like it right now. But Los Angeles and Detroit compared, God, I'm going to take L.A., the bright lights of Los Angeles, Hollywood. And he seems like Mr. Hollywood. I mean, that's just my take on Blake. And I'm not saying he's the most disappointed, upset dude in the world. But I don't think, honestly, at the end of the day, he goes to bed, sleeping at night, and thinking, oh, God, I love it here in Detroit. What do you have to say in response to that, Aaron? And you guys probably disagree with me, but here we go.
I do disagree because Blake is spending a lot of time here in the offseason, where last year he kind of went back to California and stayed in California. This year he's spent some more time here in Michigan. Yes, he's been out back and forth to California, but he's come back a lot. And you've heard some not true stuff about Blake. I mean, I know there's been some Twitter accounts that have tried to spur that Blake is unhappy in Detroit, that he's demanded a trade, and none of that has come from any actual believable source, any serviceable source. So when you look at his success, when you look at he's staying in Detroit in the offseason, he's spending time here, he has a great relationship with guys on the team like Andre Drummond and Kyrie Thomas. There's reason to believe that he's happy, and you haven't heard any drama surrounding Griffin in his time in Detroit so far. So I think that just kind of backs that up. Does he want to be in LA? Maybe, yeah. And it's good that he's able to go back in the offseason and do his comedy thing. And he was just on some boat party with Chandler Parsons. But I do think that he likes the quietness, the humbleness of Detroit. I just don't think he's upset here.
See, I wonder if he likes it as quiet as it is on a night-to-night basis at Little Caesars Arena. And there are areas where you can go and party. I mean, downtown Detroit is nice. Midtown, right? You have Royal Oak, you have Birmingham. There are nice places. I think he lives in Birmingham. He goes out and parties in Royal Oak. Or a lot of the athletes here in Metro Detroit for the pro Detroit sports teams do party in Royal Oak and downtown Royal Oak specifically. I've seen it myself. Not that I've partied like those guys. Would love to be there with them.
Vito, it's okay.
I'm not going to spread too many stories right now here on these airwaves anyways. But, Brendan, what do you have to say?
This is one bad hombre out in Royal Oak on Friday night, you know?
When I am in Royal Oak, once in a while. But anyways, your response to Blake Griffin potentially not being happy.
I think that take is soft like Charmin.
Okay.
I'm kidding. No, here's the thing to remember. You know, Blake's from Oklahoma. He's from a smaller town. He's from a quiet town. Yes, he's able to build his persona in L.A. Yes, that spotlight, that movie scene, if you will, all about it. And he capitalized, and I think he did. He kind of grew to love it. But I think coming to a spot like Detroit is maybe bringing back more of that home root, that little just, it's a quieter town. It's a town that sleeps, you know? And I think Aaron's point of, you know, if Blake wanted to just be in L.A. and that's all he wanted to do, he would still, find his way to get onto, you know, different TV shows or get in different movies and such. But the other thing is he'd go back and he'd spend his offseason there, and that's where he'd be. And he's spending a lot of time in Detroit. And I bet when he was first traded to Detroit, there was very little bit about him that was happy because of A, how it went down, B, him going to a franchise that doesn't look like they have a chance to compete for anything, C, I'm in LA right now. Why do I want to go to Detroit? Over time, though, I think it's really grown on Blake. And I think Blake's been able to build a little bit of his own quieter but unique brand here. And he's having fun here. And so I don't know. I bet there's parts of Blake that misses that LA lifestyle and maybe being closer to all the movie scenes and things like that. But I'm doubting he's looking for a Kardashian right now. I'm sure he's sending enough checks that way anyways. You know?
He's still having fun. He has many women that he can pick from, okay? But I think when he first got traded, I think he did probably say to himself, hell no, and maybe dropped an F-bomb and an expletive or two. Because you're thinking, you're going from L.A., and a Clippers franchise that have been competitive.
Right.
More than the Pistons in recent memory. Not that the Clippers have ever won anything, but they never really achieved a high level of success with Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan, Blake Griffin. They always underachieved come postseason time. But the Pistons weren't even making the playoffs.
Right. Well,
so there was a difference there, I think, when he was traded at least.
And this isn't unfamiliar to Blake, though, because when he got to the Clippers were, I mean, beyond a little brother's not even a fair term for him. I mean, they were the bottom dog in L.A. Nobody cared about the Clippers. It was Lakers, and that's it. And he was part of the resurgence of that franchise. So, yes, he had some investment in that because, I mean, he was part of, you know, reviving that organization. But he's also used to playing for a team and an organization that either the expectation was low or the realistic output was going to be below average. And I think Blake's come here and he's seen, okay, well, we have some pieces in place. This is a challenge. We may not win a championship, but what can we put together and how can we maybe revive the Pistons organization? And I got to tell you, from being at Little Caesars Arena during the playoffs and the way, I mean, the crowd was very good. It was packed in there. And then you start getting the refs you suck chant. And Blake joins in with the refs you
that
suck.
was cool to see.
And that right there, just like it felt like the moment where, I mean, Blake was already, at that point, I think, happy being in Detroit, locked into what he's doing, at least committed to the city and the organization. But that right there was like just that really cool kind of cute moment between Blake and the fans, where now Detroit needs to find a way to take another step and kind of build on that. You've seen now your star just take that next step with the fans.
And then Aaron, really quick, he became Detroit's own, I think, in that moment. And just playing 2 games in the playoffs when he was hobbled, wasn't 100%, but was gutsy performances out of Blake, who I think was deemed a pretty boy before in L.A. So even if he didn't think this would benefit him, the stint in Detroit, which may never lead to anything of high magnitude in the playoffs, I think still now what he's gone through this past season, playing those 2 games in the postseason, it's kind of rejuvenated his image.
Yeah, Blake Griffin has proved so many people wrong. I mean, I remember reading stuff before the season that was ranking the top players in the league, and the talk on Blake Griffin was, this is him riding off into the sunset. This is his, becoming, no one cares about him anymore. He's not as good. He's injury prone. He's going to be on the Pistons. Who the heck cares about the Pistons? And Blake Griffin responded with having his healthiest season since the 2013-2014 season, playing the best basketball of his career, leading the Pistons to the playoffs, and showing that he is so much of a warrior that he played through a leg injury, an ankle injury that he had to have surgery on like a day or 2 after the playoffs ended for him. He played 2 games on that, and he played pretty well considering the circumstances. He cemented himself as a warrior. He remained as a top player in the league, and Pistons fans embrace him. Now, I think Pistons fans embrace him from the minute he got here because, it's Blake Griffin. That's a star name. That's an all-star. But Detroit sport fans, Pistons fans in general have kind of been skeptical of believing in players. They don't love Drummond. They don't love Jackson. They've bought into Kennard, and they've bought into Griffin, and that's really it. And I think some believe in Ish Smith to a certain level, but he's only Ish Smith. He's not a big name or anything. But Griffin, from the beginning, has had the respect of Detroit sports fans, whether they like the Pistons or not. They just knew that Blake Griffin was a good player, and he continued to build upon that. And, another thing with the fans is the Pistons, and maybe this is just PR, but they said throughout the season, we know we have to be better to earn the fans' support. We know that when we are hot, fans are going to come out and they're going to show up. But when they lose a game to the Atlanta Hawks, fans are going to be pissed, and rightfully so, because they're the Atlanta Hawks, and the Pistons have a bit brighter season than them in their minds. So they know where they stand with this city. They know the fan base, the Detroit sports fan base, is on thin ice because of the lack of success that the city and the teams have had in recent years. So they know that they're going to have to do a lot to earn that respect, and Blake Griffin has helped lead the charge of bringing that respect back to the Pistons. That the franchise that won championships and with the Bad Boys and won it with the going to work Pistons, where they upset the Lakers in that underdog fashion. Blake Griffin's trying to bring that same underdog mentality back to Detroit.
So I like Blake Griffin. I like Luke Kennard. I like Andre Drummond even to an extent. What do the Pistons need to add this offseason to support those guys in their attempt to be a competitive squad going into this upcoming season?
The biggest thing was improving on the wing to me. That's what I targeted as what they needed to do. And if Snell ends up starting for the Pistons, which it sounds like he will be, I'm not going to be the most excited. I'm not going to be the person that says Tony Snell is this great player. He's going to be amazing. I was thinking a bit bigger. I was thinking of Marcus Morris, a Bojan Bogdanovic. But Snell and Doumbia are going to help right away. They're 2 bigger players or 2 lengthier players that defend. Snell can hit shots. Doumbia can handle it, get to the basket a little bit. Now the Pistons have to address the point guard spot. There are rumblings that they want to upgrade over Jackson, or they got to address the backup point guard situation if they keep Jackson. That's going to be the big thing, because they either need to upgrade or they need to get insurance at the point guard spot, and then they have to address the backup center spot. A guy I like is Robin Lopez. Should be pretty cheap. He's a veteran. Not going to take a lot of touches, but rebounds, block shots. That's someone that should be cheap, should fit right away, and should help right away. So it's not going to be – I don't think you're going to see another huge move from the Pistons. I really don't think they're going to trade Reggie Jackson or bring in a better point guard than him at this point, especially with Mike Conley off the table, which thank goodness the Pistons didn't trade for him considering his age, his injury history, and his contract. But it's addressing some of the small things, and backup point guard and backup center are those two things that they have to address right now. And how well they address it, if they end up with Beverly and Robin Lopez, heck, that's probably the best case scenario. If they end up with Ish Smith and maybe Check Diallo as a backup center that's now on the market, it's probably not as exciting, but it's still going to help. Basically, the Pistons have to do better than Jose Calderon and Zaza Pachulia, and that's not too hard to do. And if they're able to do that, when you look at the moves they've already made, this should be a better team than it was last year.
Brendan, the Pistons have to build the depth. Simply, at point guard, at center. Patrick Beverly, I don't see it coming here. I think Motown fans, Pistons fans would love it if that did occur. But is that really going to happen, you think? And then how about Robin Lopez at center? What would you think of that combo coming to Motown?
Well, I'd be thrilled. I don't think you get Beverly. The biggest reason why is because Beverly can be a starter back in L.A., and I feel like he's going to have that mentality if there's unfinished business there. So I don't see him going anywhere but back to the Clippers, personally. Robin Lopez, I think, is a great target for backup center because Aaron, really said it. He brings what you need. He doesn't command the ball on offense, so you don't got to worry about having two centers that command touches on the offensive end. And Andre's gotten better with that, don't get me wrong. But Robin Lopez would come in and he'd play defense, he'd block shots, he'd get rebounds, he would do dirty work you need him to do, and he would allow your guards in that second unit to create and do what they need to do from an offensive standpoint. The backup point guard spot, there's some interesting directions I think you could go. So, a guy that even just kind of lately has been sparking interest is what kind of contract offer is Isaiah Thomas going to command? Because Isaiah's a guy that after his career year, he has hip surgery, he bounces around from Cleveland to L.A., all of a sudden now he's in Denver, and he's looking for his next move. So in a really short span of time, Isaiah went from max guy to bouncing around the league. Could Detroit find him on a cheap 2-year deal and Isaiah comes in? You now have options. If he plays really well and he fits with your starting group, well, then maybe after this year, he replaces Reggie as a short-term starting point guard option. If it doesn't work out, well, then it's a 2-year deal. You keep him as your backup for 1 more year, and you move forward. The biggest risk that Aaron and I have talked about a little bit regarding the move is that, Reggie and Isaiah, have both had injury issues. So you run the risk of what happens when both gets hurt. My opinion is you have Jordan Bone you just drafted, and you have Kyrie Thomas. You make it work, because you got to roll the dice. When you're a 41-41 team that wants to find a way to compete and win some more games, you've got to roll the dice a little bit. You were the 8th seed, okay? So you're going to go one of two ways, into the lottery or up in the standings. Worst case, then, you stay the same, right? So Detroit's in a spot where roll the dice. If you lose, maybe you don't get in the playoffs, but you get a lottery pick. If you win more games, then, there you go. Now you're a 6th seed, maybe even a 5th seed, because the Pistons could have been there this year. Couple different bounces, they're the 6th seed, right? So I guess that's where my mind is. I think Robin Lopez is a good target. As much as I'd love to see Beverly come here because I think he would just fit perfectly in Detroit, it's just unrealistic.
It's not happening.
Right.
No way, Jose.
Obviously, a guy like Seth Curry's been attached to the Pistons for a while, and he'd be a guy that comes in and just fits from a basketball standpoint what you need. A guy that could shoot the ball, he could play both guard spots. So if you have some injuries or you want to shake things up, you can move him around between the 1 and the 2, a small ball 3. So you get some options there. So I really would like to see Seth Curry be a target. But Beverly, unfortunately, as much as I'd love him, is unrealistic, and Robin Lopez should be the guy that you go after at backup center.
So I think contenders are going after Seth Curry, though, at least for a backup spot.
And that's probably
like the
true.
Lakers. Seth Curry's going to have all these suitors come after him that are competitive teams contending for titles, or at least, for deep runs in the postseason. Such as the Lakers now, LeBron and Anthony Davis. They need shooting, though, on the outside. Who could be that guy that fills that void for them? And maybe not in a starting role. It doesn't look like that would be the case potentially, but in a backup role for sure, you would love to acquire Seth Curry. Now, the Pistons, though, drawing card for a guy like that would be that he can start all the time on the Pistons. So I don't know. You got to consider that, right, as a free agent. Whether or not you want to go to a team where you're going to start every single night, or to a competitive team that hey, I can come off the bench, still get mine, and we can win a title potentially. I think a guy like Seth Curry has to weigh that factor hugely. Sure. What do you have to say in response to that, Brendan?
And I'll tell you this, though. I don't know if Seth Curry comes here and starts, because the Pistons talked about this offseason. Hey, we need to, get more length on the wings, right? It's why they drafted Sekou. It's why they go after a guy like Tony Snell. They're getting a little longer on the wing. If you tell Seth Curry he could start, all you're doing is bumping Snell out of the lineup, and now you're running a small ball, 1 through 3, with then, Blake and Andre holding their own at the 4 and the 5. But, now you're undersized at, the 3-man spot, maybe even the 2-man spot, to where I don't know. It kind of then defeats what the Pistons' objective was for the offseason. So I don't know if he comes in and starts right away. I agree he's going to have suitors. The difference is Detroit going to be willing to either overpay a little bit, or B, offer him a longer term deal where he sees some financial commitment and suitability for the long term that's what he needs to capitalize on.
That's the thing with Seth Curry. He's kind of bounced around the league throughout his career. He had to start in Cleveland after going through some G League stuff and didn't really stick there. He's bounced around through numerous teams and didn't get a long-term deal with the Blazers. So I'm sure for him, he's trying to find some long-term stability. And I do agree with Brennan that there's really not a starting spot here for him in Detroit with Jackson and Kennard and Tony Snell at your point guard, shooting guard, or small forward. But there's still a pretty big role off the bench, whether it's at the point guard or shooting guard spot, where he can kind of play both positions. A small ball 3 where you just really go for shooting in the lineup. That's where he also fits as well. But yeah, for a guy like Seth Curry, you'll probably have to pay him a couple more million at least to come to a place like Detroit rather than a team like LA or even the Clippers. LA Clippers, there's going to be a ton of places that are like, Seth, we want you here. We'll pay you. We have a role for you. The Pistons are going to have to say, we'll pay you more than what the other teams will pay. And for a team that doesn't have a ton of cap space and a ton of flexibility, that's kind of a hard thing to do.
The Pistons are looking for guys that are a little bit taller than me, okay? They're looking for size this offseason. So like I said, guys, a couple inches taller than me. Seth Curry isn't the biggest dude. Isaiah Thomas, who Brendan brought up, by the way, it's not Zeke. Zeke isn't going to be walking through those doors or that tunnel at Little Caesars Arena. This is the guy in Isaiah Thomas who played for the Celtics. You mentioned had a career year, Brendan. Since then, has been bothered by the hip injury, right, and recovering from that. Hasn't been the same since. Has just jumped around from team to team. Now he's to the extent where he's tweeting out stuff about how he just wants somebody to take a chance on him. So it's sad to see how far a guy like that has fallen. So a team like the Pistons, would they take a chance on him? Maybe. And like you said, the Pistons, I think, are right now in the state where it's worth it for them to take a chance on guys as well.
Right. Well, first of all, yeah, it is kind of sad to see the fall, if you will, of Isaiah Thomas, because at one point, he was like, he's the people's champion. He's the small guy that's going through, making plays, just willing his team to the top seed or get in the playoffs, and obviously gets hurt, and his sister passes away, and he has all these things happen to him. Then he has to have surgery, and again, he went from the top to just a drop way down. But a guy like that, if he's given the right chance and put in a position to succeed and maybe leading the second unit to start, and then you just kind of see what happens from there, right? I think it's a good fit for Detroit. And if it doesn't work, then again, it's a short-term deal. I don't think anybody's giving Isaiah Thomas a long-term deal with his injuries, right? He's looking at 1 or 2 year deals most likely. Detroit could maybe do a 2-year deal if they really wanted to get aggressive. Not even that it's aggressive, but they could do 2 years with a team option for a third, to where, hey, you come in here, you prove your worth, you're going to get 3 years out of this deal. Maybe he feels even more long-term stability and financial commitment. So Detroit, I think, has a very real chance to make a play on Isaiah Thomas, and I think it would benefit both the team, the organization, and it could potentially lead to a little re-spark in Isaiah. Obviously, he's not going to be doing this for another 7, 8, 9 years at an elite level. But if you can get him to play at a nice quality level to where you decide you want to draft a point guard and groom him for a year and move on from Reggie. Maybe you don't do that. I don't know. But you didn't get some more options. And in the worst case, it doesn't work out. But you give it a try. You roll the dice.
Enough about this Isaiah Thomas now, because he played for the Celtics at one point, okay? And he's not Zeke. So moving on from him to a guy that Tom Gores should go and get. Please go and get Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant. Not happening.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Not happening. It would be very nice. But a team in LA might be getting those guys. And it's not the Lakers, it looks like. More and more likely the LA Clippers guys, who we have mentioned already ad nauseum, right? About Blake, his past there, Patrick Beverley being from there. Probably going to go back, as Brendan said. At least he's reporting that right now. Brendan Johnson is on this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. So
Brendan with
now,
some sources.
They might bring him back and get Kawhi Leonard, as the Clippers have been rumored to be a favorite to land the services of Kawhi this offseason. If the NBA Finals MVP doesn't return to Toronto, who just won his first ever NBA title. Now, where do we think Kawhi ends up this offseason, guys? Is it back in Toronto? Remember, he did decline his player option, so he's opted out. So has Kevin Durant with the Warriors. So two big, sexy names there on the free agent market this offseason. Really the two prized free agents of this year's free agent market. But back to Kawhi now. Is it back in Toronto where he ends up, or does he go to the Clippers or somewhere else, guys? And first with you, Aaron, on that one.
I think it's a two-team race between the Clippers and the Raptors. I ultimately think he goes back to the Raptors, but boy, would the Clippers be in a great situation, really, for Leonard and for the team itself. I mean, that's where they need an upgrade the most. They need a small forward. Whether they retain Beverly or not, they already have their point guard of really the now and future in, say, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They have Landry Shamet, another young guard that fits with that team. They have a roster that is ready to compete, but they still need a star. And Kawhi Leonard, well, he fits that, obviously. And they go from, a pesky 8 seed that challenged the Warriors to they're title contenders now. Kawhi Leonard showed that he raises a team ceiling to, well, a championship-level team. I mean, the Toronto Raptors had fought for years and years to get to the NBA championship, and they were unable to do so. Kawhi Leonard steps in, and they win a championship. Do the Raptors have a better supporting cast than the Clippers do now? I do think so. I think, Kyle Lowry, Marc Gasol, Pascal Siakam are better than Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, Landry Shamet. But those two guys that I mentioned, Gilgeous-Alexander and Shamet, are very young, and they're going to continue to grow and develop. And with a guy like Leonard, that ceiling just raises and raises. And that would be a team that for years to come, throughout Leonard's contract and with the growth of their young players, and you still have Danilo Gallinari, that's a team that can compete. The Raptors, though, if they are able to retain Leonard, aren't they the title favorites? I mean, they won it last year. Those guys are still all there. It's not like anyone else big is coming off the books. Marc Gasol opted into his player contract, so that's a team that's going to stick around. Siakam can continue to develop. They're the title favorites again. And if you're Kawhi Leonard, how do you turn down max money and a chance to win a title?
Siakam, the most improved player. Now, the NBA Awards just happened earlier this week on Monday night on TNT. Shaq was the host. He was hilarious. He's a funny dude. Guys I think that won the awards were deserving. But, man, way after the fact, after the finals even, they got to change something about, I think, the date for the NBA Awards show. But anyways, Pascal Siakam, like you said, a great season for the Raptors. Kind of out of nowhere as well. Marc Gasol, that is returning to the Raptors as well. Kawhi maybe does, and it's wide open in the East. So, like you were saying, Aaron, why can't the Raptors win it again? And the Celtics are losing Kyrie, right? I mean, Kyrie Irving looks like he's gone. And let's talk about him. Where does he land? Because it looks like, once again, he's not going to be back in Beantown next season.
Yeah, I think all the talk right now is that he's Brooklyn bound. And if I'm the Nets and I've assembled the young core and the bright future that I have, I'm not sure that I want to put Kyrie in that situation, considering how he detonated in Boston this past season. So after all the great moves that the Nets have made over these past few years with Sean Marks as their general manager, yes, Kyrie Irving is a star name, but he's an explosive star, and there's some baggage that comes with him, and that worries me about his fit in Brooklyn when the Nets could just go and re-sign D'Angelo Russell, who had an all-star year and played very well for the Nets themselves, and I just don't know. Kyrie Irving is a great player, but there's just so much that comes with him that he kind of just has to be on a team that's solidified with veterans. I mean, you saw it with the Cavs. When he had LeBron, when he had Kevin Love, there wasn't all this talk of Kyrie's a problem in the locker room. Last year, with a young team with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart, there was a lot of talk of Kyrie Irving being an issue with the younger guys. So the Nets are a very young team. Do you want to put Kyrie Irving in that situation, although he's a very good player? I guess it sounds like the Nets do. But if that was me, I really don't know if I would. When I have a point guard that's growing and developing and just made the All-Star team, I might just re-sign him.
Would you rather have D'Angelo Russell, Brendan, or Kyrie Irving? You're on the spot. Give me an answer here.
Russell.
Now, why is that? Explain yourself.
Younger, long-term. You don't have to sign them, I don't think, to a max right now. But, again, you have the potential to keep growing with that core you put in place. I mean, Kyrie, I don't know exactly. How old's Kyrie right now? Is he 28, 29? Is he that old probably? Yeah. So you're going to get less out of Kyrie over the long term. Russell's still a young player, man. You get a lot out of D'Angelo Russell, and you're able to bring him back. You keep your young core going. You sign one or two more pieces around him. I think you shorten your window, and you're really trying to, well, if we get Kyrie and Kawhi leaves the East, we're going to try to make a push at this thing. And I think that's the Nets' philosophy. So if you're the Nets, if Kawhi signs back in Toronto, I think you for sure go after Russell rather than Kyrie because you need to be thinking of a longer window. But I guess if he leaves the East, you're thinking that we go after Kyrie. Kyrie maybe can attract one more big name. We take our young core. You bring in a guy with Kyrie, and all of a sudden, here we go.
So, guys, I'll leave you with this. So, both of you on the hot seat here. You got to give me some predictions for NBA free agency. The four top guys, I think, at least. Kyrie Irving, Durant, Klay Thompson, and Kawhi Leonard. Those four guys. Give me where they will land this offseason. First with you, Aaron.
Okay, so I've got, even though I don't think it's the best move, I got Kyrie going to Brooklyn, Klay Thompson staying in Golden State, Kevin Durant to New York, and Kawhi Leonard in Toronto.
Well, I have Kyrie going to Brooklyn as well. I have
It's
Klay.
an easy one, it seems like, right now, right?
There's too many things indicating, right? Klay stays in Golden State. Kawhi goes to Toronto. KD goes back to Golden State.
And with that, it's been a wrap here on this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. Johnson Square, great stuff from you guys. Pretty dynamic duo. And best of luck moving forward, too, at palaceofpistons.com. And give me your guys' Twitter handles and how I can follow you and find out more about what you guys do at palaceofpistons.com.
So you can follow Palace of Pistons on Twitter at Palace of Pistons. You can follow myself, Aaron, on Twitter at AJohnsonNBA. And you can follow Brendan on Twitter at MediaBrendan.
Absolutely great stuff once again, guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk again soon. And I'll be back in studio in Sterling Heights for the next episode of Two Bad Hombres with the Doc from Doc and Jock. Brendan, last words. You've got it because you're older than your brother. You're the oldest Johnson here today, at least. I'll give you the last words.
Vito, you're the man. Thank you.
Awesome stuff. Adios, guys.
I was trying to get it.